The family members who had deliberately excluded Aunt Eleanor from the wedding invitation list had no idea they were celebrating at Rosewood Manor, the elegant venue that she had purchased 3 weeks earlier, specifically to ensure that her great niece would have the perfect wedding day, despite the painful rejection that had left Eleanor's name conspicuously absent from the guest list. 64-year-old Eleanor Washington stood quietly in the staff entrance of Rosewood Manor, wearing a simple navy dress and comfortable shoes, watching through the service window as her brother's granddaughter, Michelle, walked down the aisle in the beautiful ceremony that Eleanor had secretly funded but had been deemed unworthy to attend as a guest. The exclusion had been deliberate and cruel. Eleanor's sister-in-law, Patricia, had made it clear during the wedding planning conversations that Eleanor's presence would be inappropriate for such an important family celebration, citing old grievances and social differences that had divided the family for years. "Eleanor just doesn't fit in with the kind of wedding we're planning," Patricia had told other family members, her voice carrying the dismissive tone that had characterized her attitude toward Eleanor since the two women had first met 35 years earlier. "This is going to be an elegant affair with Michelle's professional friends and David's business associates. Eleanor wouldn't be comfortable, and frankly, she might embarrass the family." The judgment had been based on Eleanor's modest lifestyle, her simple clothing, and her preference for staying home rather than attending the social gatherings that Patricia considered essential for maintaining the family's reputation in their upper-middle-class community. Eleanor had never married, had worked as a bookkeeper for small businesses throughout her career, and lived in the same modest house she had inherited from her parents rather than moving to the prestigious neighborhood where her brother James and his wife Patricia had established themselves. What the family didn't know was that Eleanor's apparent financial limitations were actually the result of deliberate choices rather than economic necessity. Eleanor had inherited substantial wealth from her grandmother, a successful businesswoman who had owned rental properties and had taught Eleanor the importance of living below one's means while building financial security through careful investment and community involvement. Eleanor's grandmother, Rose Washington, had been one of the few black women in their city to own commercial real estate during the 1940s and 50s. She had purchased buildings that other investors had overlooked, had provided affordable housing and business spaces for families who faced discrimination from traditional landlords, and had accumulated considerable wealth while helping her community build economic stability. Eleanor, her grandmother had told her when she was 16 and had expressed embarrassment about their family's modest lifestyle compared to some of her classmates. "Real wealth isn't about impressing people with what you own. Real wealth is about having the resources to help others and the wisdom to use those resources in ways that create lasting value rather than temporary display." Eleanor had inherited not only her grandmother's financial assets, but also her philosophy about money, community responsibility, and the importance of maintaining humility despite economic success. Eleanor owned 4 rental properties, had a substantial investment portfolio, and possessed enough liquid assets to make major purchases without affecting her long-term financial security. But Eleanor had chosen to live simply, to work in modest employment that she enjoyed, and to avoid the kind of material displays that might have impressed her family but would have contradicted her grandmother's teachings about the proper relationship between wealth and character. The decision to exclude Eleanor from Michelle's wedding had been particularly painful because Eleanor had always maintained a close relationship with her great niece. Eleanor had attended Michelle's school plays, had helped her with college application essays, and had provided emotional support during Michelle's difficult breakup with her previous boyfriend. Michelle had wanted to invite Eleanor, but she had deferred to her grandmother Patricia's wishes rather than creating family conflict during an already stressful wedding planning process. Michelle's compliance with Patricia's decision had hurt Eleanor more than the initial exclusion because it suggested that family harmony was more important to Michelle than Eleanor's feelings or their personal relationship. Eleanor had learned about the wedding details through conversations with other family members who assumed she had chosen not to attend rather than recognizing that she had never been invited. The wedding was scheduled for Rosewood Manor, an elegant venue that the family had chosen despite the significant expense, because Patricia insisted that Michelle deserved the best possible setting for the most important day of her life. When Eleanor had contacted Rosewood Manor to inquire about the cost of the wedding, she had been surprised to learn that the venue was actually for sale. The current owners were retiring and looking for a buyer who would maintain the property's reputation for hosting elegant events while preserving its historical character and community significance. Eleanor had arranged to tour the property on a Tuesday morning when the venue was empty, walking through the beautifully landscaped gardens, the elegant ballroom with its crystal chandeliers, and the smaller reception rooms that had hosted countless celebrations over the past 40 years. The property represented exactly the kind of investment that her grandmother would have appreciated. A beautiful, well-maintained asset that served important community functions while generating steady income. The purchase had been completed in less than 3 weeks, with Eleanor paying cash for the entire property and immediately implementing improvements that would ensure Michelle's wedding exceeded even Patricia's high expectations. Eleanor had hired additional florists, upgraded the catering arrangements, and arranged for live music that would transform the celebration into something truly memorable. But Eleanor had made these arrangements anonymously, working through her attorney and the venue's event coordinator to ensure that the family never learned the identity of the person who had made their dream wedding possible. Eleanor wanted Michelle to have a perfect wedding day, but she also wanted to protect herself from the complicated emotions that would arise if the family discovered her involvement. Eleanor had also decided that she would be present for the wedding, not as a guest in the main celebration, but as an observer who could witness Michelle's happiness while maintaining the dignified distance that the family had imposed upon her. She had arranged with the venue staff to watch the ceremony from the service areas, where she could see everything that mattered without intruding on the family's carefully planned social arrangements. Standing in the staff entrance, watching Michelle exchange vows with David in the sunlit ballroom that Eleanor now owned, Eleanor felt a complex mixture of emotions. The pain of exclusion remained sharp, but it was balanced by the satisfaction of knowing that she had contributed to Michelle's happiness and the profound sense of purpose that came from using her resources to create joy for others, even when those others had chosen to exclude her from their lives. The wedding was beautiful, exactly as Patricia had envisioned, with elegant flowers, professional photography, and a guest list that included all the people the family considered important enough to witness Michelle's transition into married life. Everyone was there except Eleanor, whose absence was noted by no one because her invitation had never been extended. Eleanor watched Michelle's radiant smile, David's obvious devotion, and the happiness of family members who had gathered to celebrate this important milestone. The scene represented everything that weddings were supposed to be. A joyful union surrounded by the love and support of family and friends. The irony was profound, but not bitter. Eleanor had been excluded from the celebration, but she had made the celebration possible. She had been deemed inappropriate for the family's social circle, but she had provided the setting that allowed their social aspirations to be fulfilled. She had been rejected, but she had responded with generosity rather than resentment. As the ceremony concluded and guests moved toward the reception area, Eleanor prepared to leave Rosewood Manor, satisfied that Michelle's wedding day had been everything the young woman had hoped for. Eleanor's role had been invisible but essential, a pattern that had characterized her approach to family relationships throughout her adult life. As Eleanor made her way toward the parking area, she paused to listen to Patricia's voice carrying through the open doors of the reception hall, where her sister-in-law was expressing gratitude to the venue coordinator for the absolutely perfect arrangements that had somehow exceeded all their expectations despite their modest budget. "Mrs. Chen," Patricia was saying to the event coordinator, "I don't understand how we managed to get such beautiful flower arrangements and upgraded catering within our original budget. The live string quartet alone should have cost more than we had allocated for all the music. Are you certain there hasn't been some kind of billing error?" Eleanor smiled quietly as she overheard Patricia's confusion about the unexpected enhancements that had transformed Michelle's wedding into something far more elegant than the family had thought they could afford. What Patricia didn't know was that Eleanor had instructed her attorney to cover all additional expenses while maintaining the fiction that the original budget had somehow stretched to accommodate these improvements. The generosity had been motivated not by a desire for recognition, but by Eleanor's understanding of how important this wedding was to Michelle and her determination to ensure that her great-niece's special day would be memorable for all the right reasons. Eleanor had learned about the power of anonymous giving from her grandmother, Rose Washington, whose own acts of quiet philanthropy had shaped Eleanor's approach to using wealth as a tool for creating happiness rather than displaying status. Rose Washington had been ahead of her time in many ways, building a successful real estate business during an era when few women, and even fewer Black women, had access to the capital and opportunities necessary for property investment. Rose had started with a single duplex purchased in 1943, with money she had saved from working as a seamstress and taking in laundry, gradually expanding her holdings to include apartment buildings, commercial spaces, and eventually the small office complex that still generated substantial monthly income for Eleanor. Eleanor, Rose had told her granddaughter during one of their weekly walks through the neighborhood where Rose's rental properties provided affordable housing for working families. The most important thing about having money isn't what you can buy for yourself. The most important thing is what you can make possible for other people, especially when they never know that you were the one who helped them. Eleanor had carried that lesson with her throughout her adult life, using her inherited wealth to provide scholarships for neighborhood children, to help struggling families with emergency expenses, and to support local businesses during difficult economic periods. Her approach had always been to work through intermediaries and charitable organizations, ensuring that her assistance remained anonymous and that recipients could maintain their dignity while receiving help. The decision to purchase Rosewood Manor had been consistent with Rose's philosophy of investing in properties that served important community functions while generating reasonable returns. The venue had hosted thousands of celebrations over 4 decades, providing families with a beautiful setting for weddings, anniversaries, and other milestone events that deserved special recognition. Eleanor had also been motivated by her understanding of how much the wedding meant to Michelle, who had been planning her celebration for over a year and had expressed genuine excitement about every detail, from the flowers to the music to the menu selections. Michelle's happiness mattered more to Eleanor than the family politics that had led to her exclusion from the guest list. The wedding preparation had required Eleanor to work carefully behind the scenes, coordinating with vendors and staff while maintaining her anonymity. She had met with the florist to upgrade the flower arrangements from simple bouquets to elaborate displays that would create the elegant atmosphere Patricia had envisioned but couldn't afford. She had arranged for the catering company to include additional courses and premium ingredients that would elevate the dinner service beyond the basic package the family had selected. If this story is touching your heart, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. Most importantly, Eleanor had hired a professional string quartet to provide live music throughout the ceremony and reception, replacing the recorded music that the family had planned to use in order to stay within their budget constraints. The live music transformed the entire atmosphere of the celebration, creating the kind of sophisticated ambiance that would make Michelle's wedding feel truly special. Eleanor had also arranged for professional photography services that would ensure Michelle and David had beautiful images to commemorate their wedding day. The family had planned to rely on amateur photography from relatives, but Eleanor had quietly contracted with one of the city's most respected wedding photographers to capture every important moment of the celebration. These enhancements had been presented to the family as complimentary upgrades provided by the venue's management, allowing them to enjoy the improved services without questioning their good fortune or feeling obligated to someone they didn't know. Eleanor's attorney had worked with the venue coordinator to create a plausible explanation for the unexpected generosity that protected Eleanor's privacy while enabling the family to accept the improvements gracefully. The most challenging aspect of Eleanor's involvement had been maintaining her emotional equilibrium while watching the family celebrate Michelle's engagement and wedding preparations, without acknowledging her absence or considering the impact of their exclusion. Eleanor had attended family gatherings for decades, had been present for every major milestone in Michelle's life, and had always been treated as an integral part of the extended family, until Patricia had decided that Eleanor's presence might somehow diminish the social status of Michelle's wedding celebration. Eleanor understood that Patricia's attitude was rooted in insecurity about her own social position and her desire to create an event that would impress their community and validate her sense of having achieved success through her marriage to James. Patricia's exclusion of Eleanor was less about Eleanor herself than about Patricia's need to control every aspect of the wedding to ensure that it reflected the image she wanted to project about their family's status and refinement. But understanding Patricia's motivations didn't eliminate the pain of being excluded from an event that represented one of the most important days in Michelle's life. Eleanor had helped Michelle choose her college major, had provided emotional support during difficult times in Michelle's romantic relationships, and had been a consistent source of encouragement and guidance throughout Michelle's transition to adulthood. The exclusion had also created tension between Eleanor and her brother James, who had allowed his wife to make decisions about the guest list without considering Eleanor's feelings or their long-standing sibling relationship. James had been apologetic but passive, explaining to Eleanor that he didn't want to create marital problems by challenging Patricia's wishes about wedding arrangements. "Eleanor, you know how important this wedding is to Patricia," James had said during an uncomfortable phone conversation about the guest list. "She's been planning this for months, and I don't want to upset her by interfering with decisions she's already made. Maybe we can have a nice family dinner after they get back from their honeymoon, something more intimate where everyone can relax and celebrate together." The suggestion of a post-wedding dinner felt like a consolation prize that acknowledged Eleanor's importance to the family while avoiding any challenge to Patricia's authority over the wedding celebration. Eleanor had agreed to the future dinner plans while privately deciding that her response to the exclusion would be to ensure that Michelle's wedding was as beautiful as possible, regardless of whether she was welcomed as a guest. Standing in the Rosewood Manor parking lot, listening to the sounds of celebration echoing from the reception hall, Eleanor felt a complex satisfaction that came from knowing she had contributed to Michelle's happiness while maintaining her own dignity in the face of family rejection. The wedding was proceeding exactly as Michelle had dreamed, with elegant surroundings, beautiful music, excellent food, and the presence of everyone the family considered important. Eleanor's absence was the one discordant note in an otherwise perfect celebration. But that absence was the result of choices made by others rather than any deficiency in Eleanor's character or worthiness to participate in family celebrations. Eleanor was walking toward her car when she heard Michelle's voice calling her name from the main entrance of Rosewood Manor. Her great-niece was hurrying across the parking lot in her wedding dress, her face showing a mixture of surprise, confusion, and something that looked like hope. "Aunt Eleanor!" Michelle called out, lifting the hem of her dress to avoid tripping as she approached. "Mrs. Chen told me that someone saw you here during the ceremony. I can't believe you came. Even though—" Michelle's voice trailed off as she struggled to find words for the painful family situation that had resulted in Eleanor's exclusion from the wedding invitation. Eleanor turned to face her great-niece, seeing in Michelle's expression the same conflict that had characterized their relationship throughout the wedding planning process. Michelle had clearly wanted Eleanor to be part of her special day, but she had also wanted to avoid the family tension that would have resulted from challenging Patricia's decisions about the guest list. "Michelle, you look absolutely beautiful," Eleanor said warmly, focusing on her great-niece's happiness rather than the circumstances that had brought them together in the parking lot. "This is exactly the wedding you deserve, and I'm so happy that everything has been perfect for you." "But, Aunt Eleanor, why are you leaving? The reception is just starting and there's dancing and the cake cutting." Michelle's voice carried genuine distress at the thought of Eleanor departing before the celebration was complete. Eleanor struggled with how to explain her presence at Rosewood Manor without revealing the truth about her ownership of the venue or her role in making the wedding possible. She had intended to observe the ceremony quietly and then leave without any family members becoming aware of her presence. "Sweetheart, I just wanted to see you get married," Eleanor said gently. "I didn't want to cause any problems with your grandmother's plans for the reception, but I couldn't miss watching you start this new chapter of your life." Michelle's eyes filled with tears as she began to understand the depth of Eleanor's love and the sacrifice that her aunt had made to be present for her wedding despite being excluded from the formal celebration. "Aunt Eleanor, I'm so sorry about the guest list. Grandmother Patricia said it would be better if we kept the wedding small and focused on immediate family, but I never wanted you to feel unwelcome." The explanation revealed Michelle's genuine innocence about the real reasons for Eleanor's exclusion, and her belief that the decision had been based on space limitations rather than Patricia's deliberate judgment about Eleanor's social appropriateness for the wedding celebration. Before Eleanor could respond, Mrs. Chen, the venue coordinator, approached them with a concerned expression. "Mrs. Washington, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's been some confusion about the billing arrangements. The family is asking questions about the additional services, and I'm not sure how to explain the adjustments that were made to their original package." Michelle looked confused by the reference to billing adjustments and Mrs. Chen's deferential tone when addressing Eleanor. "I don't understand. What billing adjustments, and why is she calling you Mrs. Washington instead of Miss Williams?" Eleanor realized that her careful plans for anonymity were beginning to unravel, and that she would need to make some difficult decisions about how much truth to reveal to Michelle and, ultimately, to the rest of the family. "Mrs. Chen," Eleanor said quietly, "perhaps we could discuss the billing matters later. I don't want to interrupt Michelle's wedding day with business concerns." But Michelle was already putting together pieces of information that didn't make sense within her understanding of Eleanor's circumstances and role at the wedding. "Aunt Eleanor, how do you know Mrs. Chen? And what additional services is she talking about? Our family paid for a basic wedding package, but everything today has been so much more elegant than what we expected." The moment of revelation was approaching whether Eleanor wanted it or not. Michelle's natural intelligence and her knowledge of the family's budget constraints had led her to ask questions that would inevitably expose the truth about Eleanor's involvement in creating the perfect wedding celebration. Mrs. Chen looked uncomfortable about being caught between Eleanor's desire for privacy and Michelle's growing curiosity about the mysterious improvements to her wedding arrangements. "Perhaps I should leave you two to discuss this privately, Mrs. Chen suggested diplomatically. "No," Michelle said firmly, her voice carrying the authority of a bride who suddenly realized that important information about her own wedding was being kept from her. "I want to understand what's happening here. Mrs. Chen, what additional services are you referring to, and how is my Aunt Eleanor involved in the billing arrangements?" Mrs. Chen glanced at Eleanor for guidance, recognizing that any explanation would reveal Eleanor's central role in transforming Michelle's wedding from the modest celebration the family had planned into the elegant affair they were currently enjoying. Eleanor took a deep breath, understanding that her anonymous generosity was about to be exposed, and that the family would have to confront the reality of who had actually made Michelle's dream wedding possible. "Michelle," Eleanor said gently, "I purchased Rosewood Manor 3 weeks ago. When I learned that your family had chosen this venue for your wedding, I wanted to ensure that your special day would be everything you had hoped for, regardless of the budget constraints that might have limited your options." The revelation hit Michelle like a physical blow. Her aunt, the woman who had been excluded from the wedding for being socially inappropriate, was actually the owner of the elegant venue where they were celebrating. Eleanor had not only made the wedding possible, but she had enhanced every aspect of the celebration while remaining invisible to the family who had rejected her. "You own Rosewood Manor?" Michelle whispered, her voice filled with amazement and growing understanding of the magnitude of Eleanor's generosity. "You bought this place for my wedding?" "I bought it because it was a good investment that aligned with my grandmother's philosophy about property ownership," Eleanor explained carefully. "But yes, I also wanted to ensure that you would have the beautiful wedding you deserved, even if I wasn't welcomed as a guest." Michelle began to cry as she processed the full implications of what Eleanor had done. Her aunt had responded to family rejection with extraordinary generosity, had used her own resources to create the perfect wedding celebration, and had asked for nothing in return except the satisfaction of seeing Michelle happy. "Aunt Eleanor, this means that everything, the flowers, the music, the photography, the upgraded dinner service, all of this came from you," Michelle said, her voice breaking with emotion. "You gave me the most beautiful wedding imaginable, and our family treated you like you weren't good enough to be here." The truth was now fully exposed, and both women understood that this revelation would fundamentally change the family dynamics that had led to Eleanor's exclusion from the wedding celebration. 2 months after the wedding revelation, Eleanor Washington sat in her modest living room, wearing the same simple navy dress she had worn to watch Michelle's ceremony from the staff entrance, now hosting a weekly family dinner that had become a cherished tradition where every member was welcomed with equal warmth and respect. The transformation had begun the moment Michelle had insisted on bringing Eleanor into the reception hall to announce the truth about who had made their perfect wedding possible. The revelation had created a moment of profound reckoning for every family member who had participated in Eleanor's exclusion. "Everyone, please listen," Michelle had announced to the gathered wedding guests, her voice carrying the authority of a bride who had just discovered something that changed everything she understood about family and generosity. "I want you all to know that this beautiful celebration, this perfect venue, and all the wonderful surprises we've enjoyed today are gifts from my Aunt Eleanor, who wasn't invited to my wedding, but who owns Rosewood Manor and made everything possible." The silence that had followed Michelle's announcement was deafening. Patricia's face had gone white as she processed the implications of what her granddaughter was saying. James had looked stricken as he realized that the sister he had allowed to be excluded was actually the person responsible for creating the elegant celebration they were all enjoying. "Eleanor," Patricia had whispered, approaching her with obvious mortification. "I had no idea. We never knew about your circumstances. I thought—" Eleanor had responded with the same grace that had characterized her approach to the exclusion, focusing on the family's happiness rather than their mistakes. "Patricia, the important thing is that Michelle has had the wedding day she dreamed of. That's all that matters to me." But Michelle had not been satisfied with Eleanor's diplomatic response. "No, Aunt Eleanor, that's not all that matters. What matters is that our family treated you badly, and you responded by giving us the most generous gift imaginable. We need to acknowledge what happened and make sure it never happens again." The confrontation had forced the family to examine their assumptions about worth, status, and the relationship between material appearance and true character. Eleanor's quiet wealth and her decision to live modestly had been misinterpreted as financial limitation rather than understood as deliberate choice guided by her grandmother's values about money and community responsibility. In the months that followed, the family had learned about Eleanor's real estate investments, her scholarship programs for local students, and her anonymous contributions to community organizations that provided services for families in need. Eleanor's bookkeeping work had been a choice rather than a necessity, providing her with purposeful employment while allowing her to maintain the modest lifestyle that kept her connected to people from all economic backgrounds. Patricia had undergone the most dramatic transformation, evolving from someone who judged people by their material displays to someone who understood that true elegance came from character rather than clothing or social position. She had asked Eleanor to help her understand how to contribute to community causes in meaningful ways, rather than simply attending charity events for social recognition. "Eleanor, I want to learn how to give back the way you do," Patricia had said during one of their new weekly conversations. "I've spent so much time worrying about what people thought of our family's status that I never considered what we could do to actually help our community." James had also changed, developing the backbone to prioritize family relationships over social convenience and learning to value Eleanor's wisdom about financial management and community involvement. He had begun consulting with Eleanor about investment decisions and had started volunteering at the scholarship program that Eleanor had funded for neighborhood students. If this story moved you, don't stop here. Click the next one, subscribe, and share this with someone who still believes in kindness. Most meaningfully, Michelle and David had asked Eleanor to serve as an unofficial advisor for their own approach to marriage, financial planning, and community involvement. They had been inspired by Eleanor's example to establish their own tradition of anonymous giving, contributing to causes that supported families facing challenges similar to those that Eleanor had helped address through her quiet philanthropy. Aunt Eleanor, Michelle had said during one of their conversations about marriage and money management, David and I want to build the kind of life that creates opportunities for others, not just accumulates things for ourselves. We want to learn from your example about how to use whatever resources we have to make a difference. The weekly family dinners that Eleanor now hosted had become opportunities for genuine connection rather than social performance. The conversations focused on meaningful topics like community service, family history, and shared values rather than material acquisitions or social status comparisons. Eleanor had also made changes to Rosewood Manor that reflected her commitment to making the venue accessible to families who might not otherwise be able to afford elegant wedding celebrations. She had established a program that provided reduced-rate wedding packages for couples who demonstrated financial need, ensuring that economic circumstances didn't prevent families from celebrating important milestones in beautiful settings. The venue had become known throughout the community not just for its elegance, but for its owner's philosophy of making beauty and celebration accessible to everyone. Eleanor's approach to business had attracted couples who shared her values about community involvement and had created a reputation that brought in clients who appreciated the venue's commitment to service rather than just its aesthetic appeal. Eleanor had never revealed the full extent of her wealth to the family, preferring to maintain the modest lifestyle that allowed her to move comfortably among people from all backgrounds. But the family had learned enough about her resources and her approach to using them to understand that they had misjudged someone whose character and contributions far exceeded anything they had imagined. The wedding that had begun with Eleanor's exclusion had ultimately become a catalyst for family healing and a deeper understanding of what truly mattered in relationships. Eleanor's response to rejection with generosity had taught everyone involved about forgiveness, grace, and the power of love to overcome hurt and misunderstanding. "You know," Eleanor said to Michelle as they cleared dishes after the latest family dinner, "your wedding day taught all of us something important about the difference between being included and being valued. Sometimes exclusion reveals more about the people doing the excluding than about the person being excluded." Michelle hugged her aunt tightly, understanding that Eleanor's wisdom extended far beyond financial management to encompass life lessons about dignity, character, and the importance of treating every person with respect regardless of their appearance or perceived status. "Aunt Eleanor, you didn't just give me a beautiful wedding," Michelle said. "You gave our whole family a lesson about what real love looks like. Love that gives without expecting anything in return. Love that responds to hurt with kindness, and love that sees potential for growth and forgiveness even when people make terrible mistakes." Eleanor Washington had built more than a successful real estate portfolio and more than a beautiful wedding celebration. She had built a legacy of grace under pressure, generosity in the face of rejection, and the profound understanding that true wealth was measured by the quality of relationships you maintained and the positive impact you had on others' lives, regardless of how those others had treated you. The woman who hadn't been invited to the wedding had created not just the perfect celebration, but the perfect example of how to respond to exclusion with inclusion, to hurt with healing, and to rejection with the kind of love that transforms families and communities for generations to come.